catch me howling at the moon.
What's up guys, and welcome back to Park Pros. Today we're back with a video that's become a bit of a tradition on this channel, with it being the third year where I rank the 15 best roller coasters that I rode for the first time over the past year. Statistically speaking, 2021 was probably the best theme park year I've had since getting back into this hobby in 2018. In 2021, I visited 24 theme parks total, which was 7 more than I visited in 2020. Of those 24 parks I visited, 13 were new parks for me, and 8 of those were either just mountain coasters or FECs with 1 coaster. In 2021, I was able to pick up 57 new coaster credits, which was 13 more than in 2020 and 17 more than in 2019. I ended the year with 328 credits, and Thunderhead at Dollywood was my 300th roller coaster. Before I run through the rankings, I'll do a very brief recap of all my 2021 coaster-related travels.
I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care.
At the beginning of the summer, I finally got to do the Southeast road trip that I had originally planned for 2020. On that trip, I made my first ever visits to Kings Dominion, Carowinds, Dollywood, Beach Bend, and made return visits to Busch Gardens Williamsburg, Six Flags Over Georgia, and Holiday World. In July, I did a brief Midwest trip where I made return visits to Indiana Beach, Mount Olympus, and Bay Beach. In August, I made my first ever trip to Michigan's Adventure, and then finally in October, I got to tour the new Lost Island theme park in Iowa, then headed down to Missouri to make a return trip to Silver Dollar City while making my first visit back to Six Flags St. Louis since 2010. And of course, sprinkled into all that were trips to my home park, Six Flags Great America. So without further ado, here are the 15 best roller coasters that I rode for the first time in 2021. And just a quick reminder for the new folks that these are the 15 best of the 57 new roller coasters I rode for the first time this past year. This is not a list of my top 15 overall coasters, though I think I'm due to make that video soon. Number 15, Mystery Mine at Dollywood. I love just about everything about this ride's theme, and it has one of my favorite beginnings to a roller coaster of all time with the little pre-show section. I also really like the ride's 2 main drops and the amazing finale. But beyond those things, the ride is kind of just a little bit more boring than I was expecting. They modified the outside portion of the layout this year, and the new version of that is just not interesting, but still a fun and well-themed roller coaster. Number 14, Thunderhead at Dollywood. Like I said, this was my 300th roller coaster, and to be honest, I didn't really like this ride as much as I expected to. I think the layout is just a little bit more lateral-centric than I usually tend to prefer, although it does give a couple nice pops of air here and there. I think the main problem was that this was one of the rougher GCIs I've been on, and I just think that the shakiness of the ride kind of took me out of it a little bit. Number 13, Invader at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. I know some people are going to have a fit that I put this above Thunderhead, but I just enjoyed my rides on this a lot more. I love the fact that it has the only straight drop on a GCI coaster, which actually gave a pretty decent instance of sustained ejector, which was a really unique feeling for a GCI. On top of that, this coaster is just really smooth. It has a couple good double pops of air incorporated into the layout, and I think it's a perfect testament to the fact that bigger is not always better. Number 12, Intimidator at Carowinds. A lot of people consider this to be the worst B&M hyper, and during my first ride on Intimidator, I was genuinely confused as to why. I thought there was decent floater airtime, I really liked the turnaround, and I was having a good time on it. And then we hit the final brake run and went into the final portion of the ride, and that's when I understood why people love to hate on this ride. The last couple hundred feet of this ride have the pacing of a kiddie coaster and are basically completely pointless.
And I got a job following
slow coasters
around with a tuba.
I still had a really good time on this ride, but it is probably the weakest B&M hyper. Number 11, Kentucky Rumbler at Beach Bend. To be completely honest, before I made this video, I kind of forgot that I even went to Beach Bend. It was a really short trip and the park as a whole wasn't super memorable, but then after looking through my footage, I remembered that I did actually really like Kentucky Rumbler. It had some really solid pacing, was relatively smooth, and is surprisingly intense with some nice pops of air throughout. It also has this hilarious Mount Olympus style braking system. Number 10, Dominator at King's Dominion. This is clearly one of the better B&M floorless coasters out there. I like how this coaster incorporates turns into the first half of the layout instead of just being a series of inversions one after another. The sheer size of the loop and the Cobra roll also make it stand out. The second half of the layout though is basically like every other floorless coaster, and unfortunately it kind of loses a lot of steam on the mid-course. Number 9, Tennessee Tornado at Dollywood. This is one of the only aerodynamic roller coasters that was designed using computers before the company went bankrupt, and therefore it just holds up way better than all of the other aero loopers. I really like how this coaster climbs you up the side of the hill and then promptly drops you down it, and it uses its terrain well the entire ride. It's a shame we didn't get more aero coasters like this because the inversions are just so graceful and the ride is just glass smooth. Number 8, Afterburn at Carowinds. This is a strong inverted coaster. It sits up on this hill and has some really nice interactions with the terrain and foliage, especially in the second half of the ride. Afterburn also has some really good foot choppers during the tunnels and when you're up in the treetops. And I just love how a lot of the inversions and turns intertwine with each other. I think this is one of the more original and inspiring B&M invert layouts out there. Number 7, Twisted Cyclone at Six Flags Over Georgia. There's kind of this wide understanding that this is one of the weakest RMC hybrid coasters, which says a lot about just how good RMC is because Twisted Cyclone is still terrific. I love what they did with the first turnaround where it's almost like an inverted Cobra roll, and the wave turn that gives off that sideways airtime is just so good. I obviously think the ride would have benefited from a second lap like Wicked Cyclone has, because it does feel on the short side, but there's not a bad element or any wasted space on this coaster. Number 6, Copperhead Strike at Carowinds. This coaster is an absolute delight. I think of it as kind of Maverick light. The launches are far from intense, but they're enough to give the ride a nice balance between having some whip through the lower to the ground turns, while still having that trademark hang time on the taller inversions. It also has a couple moments of thigh bruising ejector airtime, which is just so good. I really wish this ride didn't have a $26 million price tag, because every Cedar Fair park could use one of these. Number 5, Intimidator 305 at King's Dominion. So let me give you some context to explain this placement. On the day that I was at King's Dominion, it was pouring for most of the day. And when it got to the point where it looked like it wasn't going to stop raining anytime soon, we just decided to get on I-305 in case they closed it down eventually. And I don't know if you've ever been on a 90-mile-per-hour roller coaster during a torrential downpour, but I can tell you that it is not a very fun experience. Sure enough, shortly after our rides, the park decided to close the coaster for the day, which means that I didn't get to experience I-305 outside of pretty treacherous and painful conditions. So I don't really have a good grasp on this coaster since I spent most of my rides just bracing myself, but I thought this was probably a fair spot just for the sake of this video. However, I don't plan on putting this coaster in any of my future coaster rankings until I get another ride on it, because I just don't have a clear understanding of what it brings to the table yet. Number 4, Twisted Timbers at King's Dominion. I think that Twisted Timbers is right up there with the best of the 100-ish foot tall RMC hybrids in the United States. The first half of this ride is just so good. I love the drop, I love the high-speed turnaround, and that collection of bunny hops and camelbacks in the first portion of the ride is one of my favorite segments on any RMC out there. Just straight up, violent ejector airtime without trying to be too fancy or cute. I think the second half of the ride kind of suffers for that exact reason, but the first 1800 feet or so are just so perfect, I don't even care. Number 3, Shivering Timbers at Michigan's Adventure. I think I gave enough of my thoughts on Shivering Timbers in my top 25 Midwest coasters video a couple months ago, so I'll give you an abbreviated version of what I said there. Shivering Timbers feels like a wooden B&M hypercoaster, and is basically your dream roller coaster if you love both classic wooden coasters and airtime. This is a severely underrated roller coaster that I don't think gets enough love in the national narrative. Number 2, Lightning Rod at Dollywood. From everything I've heard, the new hybrid version of Lightning Rod is a lot tamer than the original Topper Track version, which is just bonkers to me because this ride is so insane in its current form. It is a little weird that they didn't just replace the entire ride with steel track, because you can clearly tell which sections of the ride are wooden and steel just based on their drastically varying degrees of smoothness, which can be a little distracting for someone like me that tends to notice that kind of stuff. It's a little strange when one element is shaky and rough, and then the other is just completely glass smooth. But from a ride experience standpoint, I think that's this coaster's only real flaw. The ride's first half is filled with a bunch of great elements, and the quad down completely lives up to the hype as one of the best sequences on any roller coaster ever. I'm pretty sure this is currently my second favorite RMC behind You Know What, so I think that says a lot about how much I like this roller coaster. Number 1, Fury 325 at Carowinds. Fury is an incredible roller coaster because it really doesn't make any sense. Let me explain. I don't think it's very controversial to say that most B&M hypercoasters are pretty good and universally enjoyable rides. So, in theory, making them around 100 feet taller and 20 miles per hour faster should drastically elevate the ride experience, right? But then you look at rides like this, and they're still good, but they're not really that much better than most of the originals. And then you have Fury, a ride that makes all those aforementioned coasters feel like Slinky Dog Dash. It is impossible to comprehend how good this coaster is without riding it, because all the other coasters of this same exact model are all nowhere as good as Fury. It delivers a uniquely intense experience throughout with world-class elements, airtime, and speed. Also, as the 4th longest roller coaster in the world, it's one of the more complete feeling coasters out there, despite the fact that you're just barreling through the layout at 95 miles per hour. Fury is just a bizarrely unique roller coaster with a one-of-a-kind ride experience. And I'm kinda shocked that B&M and a competing park haven't tried replicating it yet. So there you go, my top 15 roller coasters that I rode for the first time in the year 2021. As you can see, I did make an effort to try to knock out a lot of the elite level roller coasters I had left in the United States over this past year, and in 2022 I'm hoping to knock out more of those coasters like Boulder Dash, Velocicoaster, Iron Gwazi. But until then, thank you guys so much for checking out the video, and I really appreciate all the love and support on the channel over the past year. I think that 2022 is going to be the best year for Park Pros yet, so I hope you guys stick around for the ride. Happy 2022, and we'll see you guys next time.